He grabbed her wrist in front of the entire room, her ex-fiancé, the man who once promised her forever, and said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "Nobody wants you, Elena. You were always just a maid. You will die a maid." The room went dead silent. Elena didn't cry. She didn't move. But the man standing in the corner, the man everyone in that ballroom was terrified of, slowly set down his glass. And when Adrian Valenti turned around, the entire room held its breath, because his eyes were locked on Elena, and they were burning. If this kind of story, about a woman who was underestimated by everyone, loved by no one, until the most dangerous man alive finally saw her. If that's the kind of story that moves you, please subscribe to our channel right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a single episode. And drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from, because I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. Elena Marquez had learned very early in life that invisibility was not always a weakness. Sometimes it was armor. She had grown up in a house where she was the oldest of 4 children, where her mother worked double shifts at a laundromat, and her father had disappeared before Elena could remember his face. She had learned to stretch a dollar until it screamed. She had learned to sew her own shoes when the soles wore through. She had learned that nobody was coming to save you, so you had better save yourself. By the time she was 22, she had a job. A real one. Inside the Valenti mansion. The Valenti estate sat on the edge of the city like a castle that had forgotten what century it belonged to. 3 floors. Iron gates. The kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful, it felt enforced. The staff spoke in whispers. The hallways were long and cold, even in summer. And the man who owned all of it, Adrian Valenti, was rarely seen before noon and rarely spoken about above a murmur. Elena had been warned on her first day. It was Maria, the head housekeeper, who pulled her aside near the kitchen and looked her dead in the eye. "There are 3 rules in this house," Maria said. "You do not ask questions, you do not make yourself noticed, and you do not under any circumstances go near the study on the 3rd floor after 9 o'clock at night." "What's in the study?" Elena asked. Maria stared at her for a long moment. "Rule 1, she said flatly, and walked away. Elena learned fast. She was good at that learning. Adapting. Becoming exactly what a space needed her to be without losing herself in the process. She cleaned the East Wing on Mondays and Thursdays. She prepared the staff meals on Tuesdays. She managed the linen inventory on Fridays. She did whatever else needed doing without being asked twice. And she watched. Because Elena Marquez had always been a watcher. She noticed things other people missed. She noticed that Adrian Valenti ate the same breakfast every morning. Black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, 1 slice of toast, but he never finished it. He always left the last quarter of the toast untouched, like he started eating out of habit, but lost interest halfway through. She noticed that he kept a photograph on his desk that he turned face down whenever anyone entered the room. She noticed that every Thursday evening, he stood in the garden for exactly 40 minutes, staring at the far end of the property, where an old stone wall separated the estate from the city road, and that he always came back inside with his jaw tighter than when he'd left. She noticed all of it. She said none of it. The first time Adrian Valenti actually looked at her, really looked not the way powerful men look at staff, which is to say, not at all, was 6 months into her employment. It was a Tuesday evening. She was carrying a tray of medications to the 3rd floor, not the study, but the adjacent sitting room for one of the older staff members who had fallen ill. She didn't hear him come up behind her. She didn't hear anything until his voice came over her left shoulder, low and flat. "Those aren't the right ones." She stopped walking. She turned. Adrian Valenti was standing 2 feet away from her, still dressed from whatever meeting he'd come from, a dark suit, no tie collar open at the throat. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep deprivation and everything to do with something that had been eating at him for a very long time. He was looking at the tray in her hands. "The blue ones," he said. "Not the white ones. She reacts badly to the white ones." Elena looked down at the tray, then back up at him. "How do you know that?" she said. She didn't mean it as a challenge. She was genuinely curious. Something shifted in his expression so quickly she almost missed it. I pay attention, he said, and then he walked away. Elena switched the medications before she went up. The next morning, she found a small note on the kitchen counter, written in handwriting so precise it looked almost mechanical. Thank you. 2 words. No signature. But she knew. She folded the note carefully and put it in her pocket. She didn't mention it to anyone. Months passed. The mansion had its rhythms, and Elena had learned all of them. She knew which floorboards creaked. She knew which staff members were unhappy and which ones were loyal. She knew that the cook, a large man named Bernard, had a sister in the hospital, and that he sometimes cried in the pantry when he thought no one could hear. She made sure someone always left food on the counter near the pantry. On those nights, nothing elaborate, just something warm that said, "I see you," without making him feel seen. She knew that the youngest groundskeeper, a boy named Paolo, who couldn't have been older than 19, was sending most of his wages back to his family in another state and surviving on almost nothing. She began making slightly too much food at staff meals by accident, of course. She knew all of them. And slowly, without ever intending to, they all knew her. Adrian noticed this too. He noticed the way the staff moved differently when Elena was in a room. Lighter, less guarded. He noticed that Bernard stopped hiding in the pantry as often. He noticed that Paolo started smiling again. He didn't say anything about it, but he noticed. Then, in the spring of Elena's 2nd year at the mansion, 2 things happened that would alter the entire course of her life. The first thing was that Adrian Valenti got sick. Not dangerously sick. Not the kind of sick that sent a man of his resources to a hospital, but sick enough that he was confined to his suite for 3 days with a fever that wouldn't break, and sick enough that his usual physician was unavailable, and sick enough that for the first time in anyone's memory, the 3rd floor felt genuinely uncomfortably human. Maria was the one who noticed the fever first. Maria was also the one who panicked first because a sick Adrian Valenti was apparently unprecedented territory. "He won't let anyone in," Maria told Elena in a low, urgent voice. He dismissed the on-call physician. He told Thomas to stop knocking. He hasn't eaten anything in 27 hours. Elena looked at her. "What room?" she said. Maria blinked. "You can't go up there." "What room, Maria?" She went up. She knocked once. Nothing. She knocked again. "I told Thomas," came the voice from inside. Rough. Stripped of its usual precision. Almost human. "It's not Thomas," Elena said through the door. "It's Elena. From the kitchen. I have soup." Silence. Then, "I didn't ask for soup." "I know you didn't," she said calmly. "You also didn't ask for a fever, but here we are." Another silence. Longer this time. She heard him move. The door opened. He looked terrible. Which was the first time Elena had thought of Adrian Valenti in any terms other than intimidating. His hair was disheveled. His eyes were glassy. He was in a dark robe that somehow still managed to look expensive, but the effect was completely undermined by the fact that he was clearly barely standing. He stared at her. "You're very brave," he said, "for someone who just made a joke at my expense." "I didn't make a joke," she said. "I made an observation. There's a difference." Something she couldn't quite name, moved across his face. He stepped back from the door. She walked in. She stayed for 2 hours. She didn't hover. She didn't fuss. She set the soup on the table and sat in the chair across from him, and talked to him the way she talked to everyone, like he was a person, not a monument. She asked him if he wanted the window open or closed. She asked if the light was bothering his eyes. When he said he couldn't finish the soup, she didn't push. She just moved the bowl to the side and handed him a glass of water and said, "That's fine, you did well." Like he was a child who had tried hard enough. He stared at her. "You talk to me like I'm ordinary," he said. "You are ordinary," she said. "Right now you have a 102 fever and you can barely sit up straight. That's very ordinary." "Most people are afraid of me." She considered that. "Most people are afraid of a lot of things that aren't actually dangerous," she said. "And not afraid of things that are. People aren't very good at measuring threat levels." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked. Elena looked at him directly. "No," she said simply. "Should I be?" He didn't answer, but the corner of his mouth moved, just slightly. By the time she left the room, he was asleep. She didn't mention the visit to anyone, but the next morning when she came to retrieve the tray, the soup bowl was empty. The second thing that happened that spring was that Daniel Ashworth came back into Elena's life. Daniel Ashworth was Elena's ex-fiancé. They had been together for 3 years that Elena would later describe to herself not as a relationship, but as a very long lesson in what she was willing to accept when she was lonely enough. Daniel was charming, successful, well-connected. He moved through rooms the way powerful people do, like he expected everyone else to part for him, and they generally did. He had proposed to Elena with a ring that was slightly too small, in a restaurant that was slightly too public, with a speech that was slightly too rehearsed. She had said yes because she was 24 and tired of being alone, and because she believed at the time that love was something you earned through patience. She learned differently. Daniel had a talent for making her feel small in ways that were impossible to prove. "I'm just being honest, Elena. You're not the sharpest person in the room. You're too sensitive. I'm trying to help you. You don't really understand how the world works. That's okay. That's what I'm here for." He never raised his voice. He never had to. The damage he did was the kind that didn't leave marks. By the time Elena walked away from him, 18 months before she started working at the Valenti mansion, she had been so thoroughly convinced of her own inadequacy that it had taken her 6 months just to trust her own instincts again. She had walked away, and she had not looked back. Until he showed up at the Valenti mansion. She was carrying a basket of fresh linens through the main foyer when she heard his voice. She would have known it anywhere. Smooth. Measured. The voice of a man who had never doubted himself a day in his life. "And Adrian has agreed to discuss the Meridian acquisition directly. I'll be handling the preliminary arrangements personally." Elena stopped walking. Daniel Ashworth was standing in the middle of the foyer, speaking to one of Adrian's business associates, a man named Carver, who Elena recognized as a regular visitor. Daniel was dressed impeccably, gesturing as he spoke, completely at ease. And then he turned and saw her. The look on his face went through 3 stages in approximately 1 second. Surprise, recognition, amusement. "Elena," he said in a tone that made her name sound like a punchline. She said nothing. "Still cleaning other people's houses?" he said pleasantly. She lifted her chin. "Still talking about yourself in the third person," she said. His smile didn't falter, but something behind it went cold. "Good to see you've still got that sharp tongue," he said. "It was always your best feature. Everything else." He glanced at the basket of linens in her hands. "Well, you ended up exactly where you belonged." She held his gaze for 1 full second. Then she walked past him without another word. She didn't let herself shake until she reached the back hallway. She didn't tell Adrian. Of course she didn't. But Adrian had a habit of knowing things without being told. 3 days after Daniel's visit, he called Elena into his study. This in itself was unusual. The study was Adrian's alone. Staff did not enter. Elena herself had never been in it. She knocked. "Come in." The study was exactly what she would have expected from a man who revealed nothing and controlled everything. Books organized with precision. A desk that held exactly what it needed and nothing else. A single window that faced the garden. Adrian was sitting behind the desk. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "Daniel Ashworth," he said. It wasn't a question. She said nothing. "He was here 3 days ago," Adrian said. "He spoke to you in the foyer." "He did," Elena said carefully. "What did he say?" She met his eyes. "Nothing important." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. "Elena," he said, and there was something different about the way he said her name. Careful, almost deliberate. "I have cameras in every public room in this house. I know exactly what he said." Her jaw tightened. "Then why are you asking me?" "Because I want to know if you're going to tell me the truth." The room was very quiet. Elena straightened in her chair. "He said I ended up exactly where I belonged," she said. He meant it as an insult. And he was right, she said simply. I am exactly where I belong. I just don't think he understands what that means. Adrian stared at her, and for the second time since she had known him, she watched something shift behind his eyes. Something that was less like the controlled neutrality he showed the rest of the world, and more like a man who had just heard something that caught him genuinely off guard. He looked down at his desk. Daniel Ashworth won't be returning to this property, he said quietly. Mr. Valenti. That's not a question, Elena. That's a statement. She looked at him. He's a business contact. I don't want you making decisions based on, he's a useful contact, Adrian said with a precision that cut through her sentence like a blade. Who is replaceable? Some things are not. The silence that followed was different from the silences Elena was used to in this house. It wasn't cold. It wasn't enforced. It felt somehow like the space before something true is said out loud. Then Adrian picked up a pen. You can go, he said. Back to neutral. Back to controlled. Elena stood. She walked to the door. She had her hand on the handle when his voice stopped her. Elena. She turned. He was looking at his desk, not at her. You are not where you ended up, he said quietly. You are where you chose to be. There's a difference. She held very still. I know, she said softly. And she left. She thought about that conversation for days. She thought about the way he said her name carefully, like it meant something. She thought about the fact that he had watched the cameras, that he had noticed, that he had done something about it so quietly and efficiently that Daniel Ashworth simply never came back, and no one mentioned it, and the world moved on. She thought about what it meant that the most powerful, most feared man she had ever encountered had looked her in the eye and told her that where she was a choice. Not an accident, not a failure. A choice. She didn't quite know what to do with that. Summer came. The mansion was rarely warm, but in summer it became something else. Not warm exactly, but less cold. The staff moved a little easier. Bernard started cooking things with fresh herbs from the garden. Paolo started whistling while he worked on the grounds. Adrian worked more in summer. He spent longer hours behind closed doors, came out looking sharper and more controlled than usual, and yet somehow Elena noticed this. He began appearing in the kitchen at odd hours, not demanding anything, just appearing. The first time he came down at 7 in the evening, poured himself coffee, and stood at the counter reading something on his phone while Elena finished organizing the weekly food inventory. Neither of them said anything. He finished the coffee. He left. The second time he came at 6:30 in the morning while Elena was starting the breakfast prep. He looked at what she was doing, then looked at her. You're here early, he said. Bernard's sister is having surgery, she said. I told him to take the morning. Did he ask you to cover for him? No. Adrian said nothing. He poured his coffee. He stood at the counter. After a moment, do you always do that? That help people who haven't asked. It's faster than waiting for them to ask, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Most people wait, he said. I know, she said. He drank his coffee. He left. The third time he came at 8:15 in the evening, and this time he didn't pour coffee. He just stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a moment looking at her. Do you eat? He said. She blinked. I'm sorry. You prepare meals for the staff. You prepare meals for meetings. I've never seen you eat. I eat, she said, slightly thrown. I eat in the staff room after. Alone. Yes. Why? She looked at him. Because that's how it works. Staff meals are at 6. I cook at 6. By the time everything is done, everyone else is done. So I eat alone. He looked at her for a moment. That seems inefficient, he said finally. It's not inefficient, it's just the way it is. He seemed to consider that. It doesn't have to be the way it is, he said. And he left again. The next evening, when Elena finished the last of the cleanup and went to sit in the staff room with her plate, she found Adrian Valenti already sitting at the table, with his own plate. He looked up at her. Sit down, he said. She stared at him. You can't be serious, she said. I'm always serious. Sit down. She sat down. They ate in silence for the first few minutes. It was the strangest thing Elena had ever experienced inside this mansion, and that was saying a great deal. Then Adrian said without looking up from his plate, "Bernard's sister, is she going to be all right?" Elena blinked. "Yes, the surgery went well. He got a call this afternoon." "Good." He was quiet. "He's been with this family for 11 years. His sister's name is Rosa." Elena set down her fork. "You know his sister's name?" "I know everyone's name," Adrian said. "I know everyone's circumstances. I know who is struggling and who is not. I know who is loyal and who is waiting to see which way the wind blows." "Then why?" She stopped herself. "Then why what?" he said. She hesitated. "Then why does it feel like no one here believes you notice them, the staff? They think you don't see them. They think they're invisible to you." He was quiet for a long moment. "Some silences are strategic," he said finally, "and some are failures." "Which one is this?" He looked at her directly. "I think," he said slowly, "that I haven't always known the difference." It was the most honest thing she had ever heard him say. She looked at him. This man who terrified an entire city, who ran empires in the dark, who had turned remoteness into a kind of armor, and she saw for just a moment the thing underneath. A man who had been alone for a very, very long time. She picked up her fork. "For what it's worth," she said quietly. "Bernard knows. He doesn't say it, but he knows you sent the flowers when his sister first got sick." Adrian was silent. "How did you know about that?" he said. "I told you," she said. "I pay attention." He looked at her, and this time the corner of his mouth moved differently than it had before. Not a half smile, not amusement. Something warmer. Something he was clearly not accustomed to letting anyone see. "You're dangerous," he said quietly. "I'm a housekeeper," she said. "Not to me," he said. And just like that, neither of them touched their food for the next 3 minutes. She should have been more careful after that evening. She knew it then. She knew it even more in the weeks that followed as the dynamic between them shifted so gradually that she couldn't have named a moment when it changed, only that it had. He started coming to the kitchen every evening. Not every night. Not reliably. Unreliably was actually worse, she realized, because it meant she noticed when he didn't come. It meant she'd set 2 plates out of habit and then stand there looking at the second one for a moment before she put it away. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself he was simply a lonely man who had found someone he could talk to without pretense. She told herself a lot of things that were true. She just didn't tell herself the whole truth. The whole truth arrived on a Thursday evening in September. Elena was in the garden, sitting on the low stone bench near the far wall, the one Adrian always stood near on Thursday evenings. She hadn't planned to be there. She'd finished her work early and gone outside for air, and only realized where she had stopped when she was already sitting. She heard him before she saw him. Footsteps on the stone path. Unhurried. He came around the corner and stopped when he saw her. They looked at each other. "I didn't know you came out here," he said. "I didn't know you did either," she said. "Not exactly." He looked at her. "Not exactly." "I've seen you from the east window," she said. "Every Thursday. You stand here for about 40 minutes. You always look at the wall." He was silent. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have." "My mother is buried on the other side of that wall," he said. She went very still. "The original property extended further." He continued, his voice level controlled, like he was reading from a document about someone else's life. "She wanted to be buried on the land, so she is. When the property line changed, the wall went up. Now she's technically on city land, but the grave is still there." He paused. "I come out on Thursdays because that was the day she died." Elena didn't say she was sorry. She had learned that sorry was often the wrong word, that it filled a silence without honoring it. Instead, she said, "What was she like?" He looked at her. Something shifted. "She was..." He stopped. Started again. "She was the only person who was never afraid of me," he said. "Before I was who I am now. When I was still becoming it. She looked at me like I was someone worth becoming. His voice was even, but his hands, Elena noticed, had tightened at his sides. She sounds like someone worth knowing, Elena said softly. He turned and looked at the wall. She was, he said. She was the kind of person who made other people better just by being near them. Not because she said the right things, because she meant them. Elena was quiet for a moment. People like that are rare, she said. Yes, he said. They are. He turned and looked at her, and the way he looked at her, direct, unhurried. Certain the way. Adrian Valenti looked at very few things in the world, made something in her chest shift in a way she was absolutely not prepared for. Don't, she said quietly. I didn't look the way. Don't what? Don't look at me like that, she said. I'm your housekeeper. You're a person, he said. You're the most honest person I've met in 15 years, and you're the only one who's ever sat in the kitchen with me and said things that were true just because they were true. Adrian. Don't tell me that doesn't mean something, he said. You know better, and so do I. The garden was very quiet. The city hummed distantly on the other side of the wall. Elena looked at the man standing in front of her, dangerous, careful, wounded, in ways she suspected even he didn't fully understand. And she thought about the woman buried on the other side of that wall, and about the boy. He must have been before he became this, and about the Thursday evenings he had spent standing here alone for years. You need to be careful, she said finally. I am always careful, he said. Not with this, she said. He was quiet. No, he agreed. Not with this. She went inside. She didn't sleep well that night. She lay in her small, tidy room in the staff wing and stared at the ceiling and thought about all the reasons this was not something she could afford to feel. She was the help. He was the man who owned the building. She had no money, no family name, no protection, and he was whatever he was. She knew the rumors. She had always known the rumors. She wasn't naive about what his empire was built on, about the way powerful men in this city spoke his name, about the fear that moved through rooms when he entered. She knew all of it, and she thought he also remembers his staff member's sister's name. He sends flowers. He notices people. He sits in a garden every Thursday because he misses his mother. She thought the truth is never one thing. She fell asleep somewhere around 3 in the morning. In October, Victoria Laurent entered their world like a storm that had been scheduled in advance. Elena was aware of her before she arrived. You couldn't work in that house without being aware of things, but she was not prepared for the specific reality of Victoria Laurent. She was beautiful in the way that things designed to be noticed are beautiful, deliberately, completely, without ambiguity. She arrived with luggage and opinions, and a smile that somehow managed to include everyone in a room while making each person feel like they were being assessed. She was Adrian's fiancée, or more accurately, as Elena would come to understand, she had been selected as his fiancée through a process that involved family alliances, business strategy, and the specific calculation of a man who had decided that love was not a thing he was allowed to pursue, and therefore he might as well pursue utility. Elena understood this the first time she saw them together. Adrian treated Victoria, the way he treated everything that was part of the architecture of his life, correctly. Precisely. With a kind of controlled courtesy that was impeccable and entirely without warmth. Victoria did not seem to notice, or perhaps she simply didn't care. What Victoria cared about, Elena understood quickly, was everything that came with the name Valenti. The estate, the power, the social position, the fear that cleared rooms when Adrian walked in, which would, once they were married, extend to her. She also cared almost immediately about Elena. The first time Victoria spoke to Elena directly was 3 days after her arrival. Elena was arranging fresh towels in the guest suite corridor when Victoria appeared from around the corner, moving with the kind of deliberate purpose that suggested she had planned this encounter. She stopped in front of Elena and looked her up and down with the smile still in place. "You're Elena," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "The housekeeper?" "Yes, ma'am." Victoria tilted her head. "Adrian mentioned you," she said. Elena's stomach shifted. She kept her expression neutral. "Did he?" she said. "He said you were reliable," Victoria said. He said you were good at your job. She paused. He said it with a specific kind of... She searched for the word, tone. Do you know what I mean? Elena said nothing. Of course you do, Victoria said pleasantly. You're a smart girl. You've been here, what, 2 years? Almost 3, Elena said. 3 years. Victoria let that land. That's a long time to be someone's housekeeper. I find the work meaningful, Elena said calmly. Victoria's smile sharpened slightly, just at the edges. I'm sure you do, she said. Well, we're going to be spending a lot of time together, I imagine. A big wedding takes considerable preparation. I'll need your full cooperation. Of course, Elena said. Victoria studied her for one more moment. Then she turned to go. One more thing, she said over her shoulder. Whatever you think you have here with him. She didn't look back. You don't have it. I want that to be very clear between us. Very, very clear. She walked away. Elena stood in the corridor holding a stack of fresh towels. Her hands were perfectly steady. Her heart was not. She told herself it didn't matter. She cleaned rooms. She managed staff. She prepared meals. She did not allow herself to think about Thursday evenings in the garden. She did not allow herself to think about the second plate. She did not allow herself to think about Adrian's voice when he said, "Not to me." She was very, very disciplined about all of this. And then came the night of the engagement party. Victoria planned the party with the precision of someone who understood that social events were at their core performances of power. The guest list alone took 3 weeks to finalize. The flowers were imported. The catering was handled by a firm whose prices Elena saw on the invoice and quietly set face down on the counter. The staff worked double shifts for a week in preparation. Elena worked 3 times her usual hours and said nothing about it. The night arrived. The mansion was transformed, not into something warmer, but into something more deliberately impressive, which was, Elena thought, exactly the point. Guests arrived in cars that cost more than she made in 5 years. Voices filled the lower floors. Music and laughter, and the particular kind of conversation that people have when they're performing for each other. Elena stayed in the background the way she always did. Directing, managing, solving the small crises that no guest ever saw: the caterer who dropped an entire tray, the lighting that flickered in the East Salon, the moment when Victoria's closest friend arrived 20 minutes late and needed to be quietly reassured. She was everywhere and nowhere, until Victoria found her. It happened in the main room near the center of the party. Victoria had been drinking not enough to be unsteady, just enough to sharpen her edges. She appeared at Elena's elbow while Elena was consulting with one of the catering staff about the dessert timing, and she said loudly enough for the people nearest them to hear, "Elena, I need you." Elena turned. "Of course," she said. "What do you need?" Victoria looked at her. Then she looked around at the nearby guests, and Elena realized with a cold clarity that this was not about needing something. "I want to discuss the serving arrangement," Victoria said loudly. "The appetizer trays have been brought out in completely the wrong order." Elena said carefully, "The order was specified in the arrangement you approved on Tuesday." "Are you arguing with me?" The conversations nearest them had quieted slightly. "No," Elena said. "I'm clarifying." "You made a mistake," Victoria said, "and I'd appreciate it if you'd own it, rather than, 'What is it you always do? Explain it away.'" She turned to the nearest guests with a bright smile. "I'm sorry, she means well. She's been here 3 years, and she still can't follow a simple instruction." A woman nearby laughed lightly. A man in a dark jacket looked away. Elena stood very still. "I apologize," she said. "You apologize," Victoria repeated, as if tasting the words. "Do you know what I find fascinating, Elena? The way you walk around this house like it means something to you." She gestured broadly, including the room, the guests, the entire estate in the sweep of her hand. "Like you have some special relationship with these walls. Like you matter here." Elena said nothing. "You're the help," Victoria said simply. "And I think somewhere you've confused yourself about what that means." She took a step closer, and she said quietly enough that only Elena could hear and a few people standing close enough to catch it. Any last wishes before you disappear from this house, sweetheart? Because I'm going to make absolutely sure that when I'm done, there's no place here for someone like you." The woman nearby laughed again, nervous and small. Elena felt her throat tighten. She thought about everything she could say. Everything she could have said. She thought about 3 years of work and cold mornings and doubled shifts, and the way she had poured herself into this place, not because anyone asked her to, but because she believed that how you treat the spaces you inhabit says something about who you are. She thought about Daniel Ashworth in this same house, in this same foyer, saying you ended up exactly where you belonged. She thought about a Thursday evening in a garden. She lowered her head. She was not going to cry in front of Victoria Laurent. She was not going to give her that. She took a breath, and then she heard the room change. It was subtle at first, a shift in energy, a different quality to the silence. The way a room full of people unconsciously adjusts when something significant enters. Then she heard Victoria's voice change too, the brightness in it flickering just for a second, like a light with a loose connection. "Adrian," Victoria said. "I heard," said Adrian Valenti. Elena looked up. He was standing 10 feet away. He had been standing there, she understood this, in a single cold, clarifying moment, long enough to hear all of it. His face was completely still. His eyes were on Elena. Not on Victoria. Not on the guests. On Elena. Only on her. And in 18 months of knowing this man, this careful, controlled, remote, dangerous, lonely man, Elena had never seen him look exactly like this. Like someone had put their hand directly on the wound he carried, and he was deciding in real time what to do about it. "Come with me," he said to Elena. His voice was very quiet. Very quiet in Elena's experience of Adrian Valenti was significantly more alarming than loud. Victoria's hand landed on his arm. "Adrian, the guests will wait," he said without looking at her. He looked only at Elena. "Come with me," he said again. She followed him out of the main room, through a corridor, through a side door, into the quiet of the study. He closed the door. He turned around. And he looked at her for a long, long moment in which neither of them said anything at all. Then he said, "Are you all right?" The question, the simplicity of it, the directness, the fact that he had just walked out of his own engagement party and his first question was, "Are you all right?" hit her somewhere she hadn't been prepared to be hit. "I'm fine," she said. He looked at her. "Elena." "I said I know what you said." His voice was careful, level, but there was something underneath it that wasn't controlled at all. "I'm asking what's true." She looked at him. She thought about a very long list of things she should say and should not say, and had promised to herself she would never say. And then she said the truth, which was, "I don't want to disappear from this house." The room was silent. Adrian held her gaze. "You're not going to," he said. "You can't promise that," she said. "She's going to be your wife. She has every right to." "Listen to me," he said, and now his voice had dropped to something so quiet it was almost not a sound at all, but it carried in the way that very certain things carry. "You are not going anywhere. That is not a promise. That is a fact. Do you understand me?" She stared at him. "Why?" she said. The word came out smaller than she intended. He looked at her. This man who said nothing that wasn't calculated, who revealed nothing that wasn't strategic, who had built his entire existence around control and precision, and he said something that was none of those things. "Because you are the only person in that room who I actually care about." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Elena had ever heard. "You shouldn't say things like that," she said. "No," he agreed. "I shouldn't." "Then why?" "Because it's true," he said. "And I spent a long time telling myself I was done saying things just because they were true. I don't want to do that anymore." Elena felt something shift in her chest, enormous, unstoppable, terrifying. "Adrian, I'm not asking you for anything," he said. "I'm not asking you to feel anything or say anything or do anything different. I just—" He stopped. He looked away at the desk, at the window, at the wall. "I needed you to know that what she said was wrong. All of it. Every single word of it. You matter here. You matter in a way that none of those people in that room. He stopped again. You matter in a way I can't explain without saying things I have no right to say. The garden outside the window was dark. The party continued somewhere on the other side of the house, muffled music, distant laughter. Elena looked at Adrian Valenti and thought about 3 years and cold corridors and second plates and Thursday evenings and a necklace she didn't know about yet and a woman buried on the other side of a wall. She thought about her mother's laundromat and Daniel Ashworth's voice and rooms she had cleaned until her hands ached. She thought about all of it, and then she said very quietly, "You have every right." The room held that sentence. Adrian looked at her, and for the first time since Elena had walked through the gates of the Valenti mansion, for the first time in longer than that, she suspected the most controlled man she had ever known looked completely, utterly unguarded. "Elena," he started. The door opened. Victoria walked in. She took one look at the two of them, the space between them, the silence, whatever it was that hung in the air of that room, and her expression went from surprised to cold in the space of a breath. "I've been looking for you," she said to Adrian. Her voice was perfectly pleasant. Her eyes were not. Adrian turned. "Victoria," he said, and the control was back, immediate and complete. "I'll be out in a moment." "The guests are asking for you," she said. "I'll be out in a moment," he said again. Victoria's eyes moved to Elena, and something in them said with absolute clarity, "You will regret this." Then she turned and left. Elena looked at Adrian. He looked at her. "Go back to work," he said quietly. "Tonight, just go back to work." "And tomorrow," she said. He held her gaze. "Tomorrow," he said, "things are going to change." She didn't know then what he meant by that. She didn't know about the phone call he made at midnight. She didn't know about the meeting he requested the next morning with his attorney. She didn't know about the document his attorney drafted, the one that bore both their names, or the decision Adrian had made standing in his study in the dark. She only knew what she heard him say. And she knew that when Adrian Valenti said something was going to change, it changed. She went back to work. She managed the rest of the party with her usual invisible efficiency. She directed and coordinated and solved problems, and smiled when spoken to. And the whole time in this back of her mind, one thing repeated on a quiet loop. You matter in a way I can't explain. The party ended. The guests left. The mansion settled back into its usual quiet. Elena cleaned up long after midnight. When she finally went to her room, exhausted down to her bones, she found something on the floor just inside her door. A folded piece of paper. She picked it up. She unfolded it. There was one sentence written in that precise, almost mechanical handwriting she would have recognized anywhere. None of this is the end. None of it. She stood in the doorway of her small room. She read it again. She sat down on the edge of her bed. And for the first time in a very long time, Elena Marquez let herself cry, not because she was sad, and not because she was afraid, but because something she had kept locked down for 3 careful years had just been given permission to exist. And that after everything was the most terrifying and the most necessary thing she had ever experienced. She folded the note back up. She put it in the drawer with the first one, the one that said, "Thank you." 2 words, the beginning of everything. The note was still in her drawer when morning came. Elena didn't take it out again. She didn't need to. She had read it enough times in the dark that the words had become part of her. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quietly present the way. Certain true things are the way you carry them in your chest without meaning to. She got up at 5:15. She washed her face. She looked at herself in the mirror for exactly 3 seconds, which was 2 seconds longer than usual, and then she went to work. That was what Elena Marquez did. She went to work. She told herself the night before was the night before. She told herself that whatever had happened in that study, whatever had been said, whatever had been admitted into existence belonged to a world that operated separately from the one she lived in. The world where she cleaned rooms and prepared meals and kept things running. The world where she was useful and invisible and safe. She told herself that. She almost believed it. She was in the kitchen at 5:40, starting the breakfast prep, when Maria came in looking like someone who had not slept either. "He called a meeting," Maria said. Elena didn't look up from the eggs. "Who did? Who do you think?" Maria lowered her voice, even though they were alone. 6:30 this morning. He called the senior staff. All of them. Elena's hand slowed. "About what?" she said. "He didn't say." Maria pulled a chair out and sat down heavily. "He never calls morning meetings. In 11 years, I have never been called into a morning meeting by Adrian Valenti. Do you know what that means?" "It means something's changing," Elena said. "Something's already changed," Maria said, and she looked at Elena with an expression that was equal parts worry and something Elena couldn't quite read. "You were in the study with him last night, after the party. Don't tell me you weren't, because Thomas saw you walk in, and he saw Victoria walk out 10 seconds later, looking like someone had put a hand around her throat." Elena said nothing. "Elena." "I was in the study," Elena said carefully. "We talked, that's all." Maria looked at her for a long moment. "You're a good girl," she said finally. "You have always been a good girl. And that's exactly why I'm going to say something to you that you are not going to like, and I need you to hear it. Like it comes from someone who cares about you." Elena set down the spatula. "People like us," Maria said quietly. "We don't get to want what we want in houses like this one. We get to do good work and be treated fairly and go home at the end of the day knowing we gave it everything. But when it comes to men like him..." She stopped, and her voice dropped to almost nothing. "It always ends badly for the woman who forgot her place. Not because she doesn't deserve better, but because the world doesn't give her better. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Elena looked at her. "Yes," she said softly. "Do you really?" "Yes, Maria." She picked the spatula back up. "I understand exactly what you're saying." Maria studied her for another long moment. Then she sighed and stood up and said, "The meeting is at 6:30, and left. Elena finished the eggs. She plated them with the precision she always did, 2 over easy, 1 slice of toast, black coffee. She put the tray together. She stood in the kitchen alone for exactly 1 minute and 30 seconds, which she knew because she counted. Then she picked up the tray and went upstairs. She knocked on Adrian's door. She heard him say, "Come in." He was already dressed, already at his desk, already in the version of himself that faced the world controlled, precise, impenetrable. He looked up when she came in. She set the tray on the desk. She turned to go. "Elena," he said. She stopped. "Sit down," he said. "I have breakfast prep. Maria can handle breakfast prep for 10 minutes. Sit down." She sat. He looked at her. He looked at her the way he had looked at her the night before. Not the way he looked at things he controlled, but the way he looked at things that mattered. "I made some decisions last night," he said. "About the staff meeting," she said. "Among other things." She waited. "Victoria wants you dismissed," he said. "She made that request to me at 11:30 last night in very clear terms." Elena's jaw tightened. And I told her no." She looked at him. "Adrian." "I also told her that I would not be making any personnel decisions based on personal preferences." He paused. "She didn't take that well." "I imagine not." "She threatened to cancel the engagement." The kitchen felt very far away. The whole world felt very far away. "What did you say?" Elena said. Adrian looked at her. "I told her," he said slowly, "that she should think carefully before she made threats she wasn't prepared for me to accept." Elena stared at him. "You told her to go ahead," she said. "I told her to think carefully," he said, but his eyes said something his words didn't. "That's not the same as saying go ahead," Elena said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." She looked at her hands in her lap. She thought about all the things this conversation could become, and all the ways it could hurt her. "You have a responsibility," she said quietly. "To your family's name, to your business, to whatever it is that you've built. You made a commitment to that woman." "I made a strategic arrangement with her family," he said flatly. That is not the same as a commitment. In your world it is. My world, he said, and there was something almost sharp in it, is exactly what I decide it is. That has always been true. I lost sight of it for a while. I am no longer willing to lose sight of it. He picked up his coffee. He set it back down without drinking it. I've arranged for a meeting with my attorney this afternoon, he said. There are things I need to address. Things that should have been addressed before now. He paused. I need you to trust me. I trust you, she said before she could stop herself. He looked at her. Good, he said quietly. Because what happens next is going to be, he seemed to choose his word carefully, uncomfortable, for a while. I want you to know that regardless of what you see or hear in this house over the next few weeks, nothing has changed about where you stand. And where do I stand? She asked. He held her gaze for a moment that lasted longer than moments usually do. Here, he said simply. You stand here. She stood up. She picked up the tray. He hadn't touched the eggs, she noticed, but the toast was gone, which was new, and she walked to the door. The meeting this morning, she said, hand on the doorknob. What are you telling the staff? That things are changing, he said, and that the people who have served this house with integrity have nothing to fear. She nodded once. She left. She made it to the back staircase before her legs stopped cooperating for about 4 seconds, and she stood there gripping the banister, breathing, reminding herself who she was and what she was doing and how she had survived every hard thing before this. She was good at surviving. She just wasn't sure surviving was what she wanted to do anymore. She wanted something more than that. She pushed off the banister and went back to work. The meeting happened at 6:30. Elena was not invited. She was, after all, junior staff. She heard about it in pieces throughout the morning from Maria, who came out of it looking shaken but steady. From Thomas, who said almost nothing, but whose expression said everything. From Bernard, who cornered Elena near the pantry at 8:30, and said in a voice just above a whisper, he's removing her from operational decisions, the fiancé. She doesn't get to make staff changes. She doesn't get input on the running of the house. He said it in front of everyone. Bernard's eyes were wide. In my 11 years, I have never heard Adrian Valenti say anything like that in front of staff. Elena absorbed this. He also said, Bernard continued, that anyone who feels their position here is uncertain should come to him directly. That loyalty runs both ways. He paused. And then he looked at Thomas and said that Thomas would be receiving a raise effective immediately for 15 years of service that had never been adequately compensated. Elena felt something warm move through her chest. He really said that, she said. He really said that, Bernard confirmed. Right in front of everyone. Thomas looked like he was going to pass out. She thought about the man she had found sitting in a garden every Thursday. The man who sent flowers to a sick woman he'd never met and didn't want credit for. The man who knew every staff member's name and their family's circumstances and had been carrying that knowledge alone for years. She thought he didn't stop seeing people. He just stopped letting anyone know he saw them. Elena, Bernard said. What did you do? He said. Not accusingly. Genuinely curious. Like she had performed a kind of alchemy he couldn't explain. She shook her head. Nothing, she said. I just showed up. Bernard looked at her for a moment. Sometimes, he said quietly, that's everything. Victoria moved through the house that day, like weather, unpredictable, oppressive, charged with the specific energy of a person who had received a blow and not yet decided how to strike back. Elena felt her before she saw her. That prickle at the back of the neck. That subtle shift in the air. She was in the second-floor hallway checking the linen supply when Victoria appeared behind her. I want to talk to you, Victoria said. Elena turned around slowly. Of course. Victoria looked at her. Really looked the kind of look that was a full assessment, top to bottom cataloging everything. You think you've won something, Victoria said. I don't think about winning, Elena said. Oh, I think you do, Victoria said pleasantly. I think you've been thinking about it for 3 years. I think you walked into this house with nothing and you found a very clever way to make yourself necessary. I do good work, Elena said. You do, Victoria agreed. You're very good at your job. You're also very good at something else, something that doesn't appear on any job description. She stepped closer. You make him feel understood, don't you? Elena said nothing. It's a skill, Victoria said. A very specific, very practiced skill. Knowing what someone needs to hear. Making them feel seen. Making them feel like you're the only person in the world who actually gets it. She tilted her head. I've met women like you before, Elena. Sweet. Earnest. Completely non-threatening on the surface. She paused. The most dangerous ones always are. I've never done anything to threaten you, Elena said. You exist, Victoria said. In this house, in his orbit. Looking at him the way you look at him and talking to him the way you talk to him, and making him question things he had already settled. Her voice was still pleasant. Her eyes were not at all. That's a threat, sweetheart, even if you don't mean it to be. Elena held her ground. What do you want, Victoria? She said. Victoria blinked as if the directness surprised her. I want you to leave, she said simply. Voluntarily. I want you to put in your notice. I'll make sure you get a generous reference. I'll make sure you get enough to get settled somewhere new. Her voice softened into something that was almost kind. I'm not a cruel person, Elena. I just know what I want. And I want what Adrian has. And you are in the way of that. Elena looked at her. She thought about the note in her drawer. She thought about none of this is the end. She thought about a man who had told her she stood here and meant it in a way that had nothing to do with geography. No, she said. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Excuse me, she said. No, Elena said again. I'm not leaving, not because of you. A long silence. You're making a mistake, Victoria said quietly. I've made mistakes before, Elena said. I know what they feel like. This isn't one. Victoria stared at her. Then she smiled, and it was the most genuinely cold smile Elena had ever seen on a human face. All right, she said softly. All right then. She walked away. Elena stood in the hallway and breathed. She had just refused the exit. There was no taking that back. She went to check the linens. Her hands were completely steady. She was surprised by that. She was also somewhere under everything afraid, not of Victoria specifically, but of the specific vulnerability of having made a choice that could not be unmade. She had lived carefully for a very long time. She had built her small real life with precision and discipline, and she had never put more on the table than she could afford to lose. Until now. Until this house, this man, this version of herself that she hadn't expected to find. The afternoon brought the attorney. Elena saw him arrive, a quiet man in a gray suit carrying a leather briefcase, who was shown to the study by Thomas without announcement and without the usual protocols that accompanied Adrian's business visitors. No coffee brought. No waiting in the reception room. Just straight to the study. The door closed. They were in there for 2 hours. Elena had no reason to be near the study. She found several anyway. She was not proud of this. She heard nothing. The study door was solid oak, and Adrian's architect had apparently been very thorough. She heard exactly nothing, and she told herself this was fine, and she went back downstairs and made herself useful. At 4:30, the attorney left. At 4:32, Adrian appeared in the kitchen doorway. Elena was alone. Bernard had left an hour ago, and the kitchen was quiet. He came in. He sat down at the counter, the same counter where they had started having their evenings, and he put both hands flat on the surface and looked at them for a moment. Then he looked up at her. I need to tell you something, he said. She set down the dish she was holding. Okay, she said. He was quiet for a moment that felt like it had a weight to it. 6 weeks ago, he said. I put something in motion, before the party. Before any of this. He paused. I need you to understand that I did it to protect you, not to own you, not to control you, but because I became aware of a specific threat to your safety, and I acted the only way I know how to act. Elena went very still. What kind of threat? She said. Victoria, he said. Not directly. She has a cousin, a man named Harlow, who has a habit of making problems disappear for people who pay him enough. His voice was even. His eyes were not even at all, they were very, very focused. I had reason to believe that a conversation had taken place between Victoria and Harlow. About you. About how to remove you from the situation in a way that went beyond dismissal. The kitchen was very quiet. "How long have you known?" Elena said. 6 weeks, he said. "And you didn't tell me." "No. Because you would have left," he said simply. "To protect me from having to deal with it. Because that's what you do. You protect people at your own expense, and you call it practical. And I wasn't prepared to let you do that." She stared at him. "You don't get to make that decision for me," she said. "I know." "I'm serious, Adrian. You don't get to." "I know," he said again. "I know I don't, and I handled it wrong. I'm telling you now because—" He stopped, and for just a moment the control slipped, and she saw the thing underneath the thing that was not strategic at all. "Because I'm not willing to keep things from you anymore. Even the things that are complicated. Even the things I did for the wrong reasons in the right direction." She looked at him. "What did you do?" she said. "I had Harlow removed from the situation, legally. There are things I know about him that he would prefer to remain unknown. He is no longer a factor." He paused. "And I did something else." "What?" He held her gaze. "I had a document drawn up," he said carefully. "A legal document. The kind that would make it impossible for anyone, Victoria Harlow, anyone to touch you without it becoming a very significant, very public problem for them." "What kind of document?" she said. He didn't answer immediately. The silence was its own answer. Elena's breath stopped. "Adrian," she said slowly. "It protects you," he said. "That's all it is. It's protection." "What kind of document?" He held her gaze and said very quietly, "A marriage certificate." The word landed in the kitchen like something dropped from a great height. Elena gripped the edge of the counter. "I don't understand," she said. "A private marriage," he said, "legally registered, filed with a civil authority in a jurisdiction where it is fully valid and completely binding. Your name and mine." "You—" She stopped, started again. "We are not married." "Legally," he said, "we are. I never signed anything." "You did," he said quietly. 6 weeks ago. The employment contract amendment. The one Maria brought you for the updated health benefits." There was a second document in the envelope. A small one. It needed one signature. She stared at him. She remembered the envelope. She remembered Maria handing it to her in the kitchen. She remembered signing the benefits form and seeing a second paper she had assumed was a rider of some kind, and signing it without reading it because she trusted. She trusted. "You tricked me," she said. The words came out flat, completely flat. He flinched. It was small, almost invisible, but she saw it. "Yes," he said. "You lied to me." "Yes." "You—" She stopped because her voice was doing something she didn't want it to do. "You stood in this kitchen, and you talked to me about honesty. You sat in that study, and you told me things that were true, because they were true." "Yes," he said. "All of that was true. And then I made a decision that I knew you wouldn't agree to," he said, "because I was afraid. I was afraid that if I asked you, you would say no. Not because you didn't want it, but because you would think it wasn't right. Because you would think about the difference in our positions, and you would decide that the honorable thing was to refuse, and then I would watch you walk into a situation that could genuinely hurt you, and I would have to let you, because you made that choice." He stopped. "I was afraid. That's the truth. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't calculation. It was fear. And I made a mistake." She looked at him. She was furious. She was also, and this was the part she didn't want to examine, not surprised. Because she knew this man. She had spent 3 years learning this man. She knew how he operated. She knew that he protected things by controlling the variables. She knew that loving something for Adrian Valenti looked a lot like building a fortress around it. She knew all of that. It didn't make it okay. "I need you to go," she said. He looked at her. "Elena, I'm not going to yell at you," she said. Her voice was very calm. "I'm not going to say things I'll regret, but I need you to leave this kitchen right now because I cannot look at you for the next—" She thought about it while. He stood. He moved toward the door. He stopped. "I would undo it if I could undo it without undoing what it protects," he said with his back to her. "But I can't, so I won't pretend I would." "That's not reassuring," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not trying to reassure you. I'm trying to be honest." "A little late for that," she said. He left. She stood in the kitchen alone. She stood there for a long time. Then she sat down on the floor, not because she was overwhelmed, but because her legs had made a unilateral decision, and she had decided to respect it, and she sat on the cold kitchen floor, and she stared at the opposite wall, and she thought. She thought about what he'd done. She thought about why. She thought about the man who'd sent flowers he never took credit for, and the notes that said thank you, and none of this is the end, and Thursday evenings at the garden wall. She thought about what it meant to be protected by someone who didn't know how to protect things without also controlling them. She thought about the difference between someone who did wrong things for selfish reasons and someone who did wrong things because they had never learned to do right things in the soft, uncertain, open-handed way that vulnerability required. She thought about whether that difference mattered. She thought about herself, about who she was and what she was worth, and what she refused to be, regardless of who she was feeling things for. She thought for a very long time. Then she got up off the floor. She went to her room. She pulled out the employment envelope from the second drawer she kept. Documents always had. Her mother had taught her that, and she found the writer. She read it. It was 2 pages. Dense legal language. But the substance was clear and complete, and exactly what he'd said it was. Her name. His name. A date. A civil jurisdiction in a neighboring state. A civil ceremony conducted by proxy. Completely legal. She sat on the edge of her bed. She was according to the state of she checked the header, according to the state of Vermont, Elena Marquez Valenti. She had been for 6 weeks. She had cleaned this man's house as his legal wife and not known it. She put the paper down. She pressed both hands over her face. She thought about 10 different things to feel, and could not settle on any single one of them, which meant she was feeling all 10 at once, which was too many things for one person to feel in a clean, organized way. She let herself feel them. She cried once briefly from sheer overload. Then she stopped. She looked at the paper again. She thought about Victoria in the hallway saying you exist, and that's a threat. She thought about Victoria's cousin Harlow, and whatever he had been hired to do. She thought about what it meant that Adrian had known about that threat for 6 weeks and had not let Elena spend one day unprotected from it, even when the protection was wrong, even when the method was a kind of lie. And she thought about something her mother had said to her once when Elena was 12 and furious at someone in school who had done something that was both genuinely wrong and genuinely kind, in a way that made it impossible to be purely angry. "The way someone protects you tells you everything about how they were hurt," her mother had said. "Doesn't make it right, but it tells you what you're working with." Elena picked up the paper. She folded it carefully. She put it in the drawer with the notes. She did not know what that meant yet, but she knew she wasn't throwing it away. She went to bed. She slept badly for the first hour, and then somewhere around midnight, deeply and without dreams. She was woken at 3:15 in the morning by the sound of raised voices. She lay in the dark and listened. Victoria and Adrian. Their voices were muffled through the walls, but the shape of it was clear. The sharpness, the back and forth, the specific rhythm of 2 people who have stopped trying to perform for each other and have started saying what they actually mean. She couldn't hear the words. She didn't need to. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought, "This is it. This is the thing he said was coming." She thought, "I hope he's ready." She thought, "I hope I am." In the morning, Victoria was gone. Not packed up and left, gone. Just gone from the public rooms of the house, gone from the breakfast table, gone from the precise social performance of engagement that she usually maintained with such discipline. Her door was closed. Adrian was in his study at 7 o'clock earlier than usual. The house felt like the hour before a storm. Elena moved through it, the way she always moved through things, steadily paying attention, solving the problems that were in front of her, and not the ones she couldn't reach yet. At 9:15 her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Elena Marquez, a woman's voice. Professional, precise. Yes, she said. My name is Catherine Lord. I'm a journalist with the City Register. I'm writing a piece about the Valenti estate, and I've received some information I'd like to give you an opportunity to comment on. A pause. The information concerns your relationship with Adrian Valenti. Specifically, some allegations about the nature of your employment over the past 3 years. Elena's blood went cold. What allegations? She said carefully. That you've used your position on staff to cultivate a personal relationship with Mr. Valenti with the intention of financial gain. That you've manipulated. Where did you get this information? Elena said. A beat. I'm not at liberty to disclose my source. You don't need to, Elena said. I understand. Ms. Marquez, I'd like to give you a chance to respond before we... I have nothing to say to you, Elena said. She hung up. She stood very still in the hallway. Victoria. The phone call was Victoria. The timing was too exact, too targeted, too precisely designed to hit the exact thing. Elena was most vulnerable to her reputation, her integrity, the question of whether she had used this house for something other than what she claimed. She thought about the Harlow cousin. She thought about 6 weeks. She thought about what remove her from the situation could mean in the hands of someone with enough money and enough motive. This was the escalation. This was what came after she had said no in the hallway. She went to the study. She knocked once. Come in. She opened the door. Adrian looked up. He looked at her face, and his expression changed immediately. Not dramatically. Not the way other people's expressions changed, but the way his did, which was a very small shift in the eyes that meant he had read everything. Tell me, he said. She told him. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, the room was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. Marcus, he said. I need you in the study in 10 minutes. Bring everything on Lord and the register. He paused. Yes, all of it. He hung up. He looked at Elena. She's going to deny it, Elena said. She won't get the chance, he said. Adrian, if this goes public. It's not going to go public, he said. Not in the way she intends. You can't control a journalist. I don't control journalists, he said. I understand what they need. And what Catherine Lord needs right now is a better story. Elena stared at him. What better story? She said. He held her gaze, and she saw in his face the decision that had been building since the conversation in the kitchen yesterday. The decision that had probably been building longer than that, since the garden, since the study, since the first Thursday evening, he'd walked outside and found her already sitting on his bench. Adrian, she said slowly, what are you going to do? What I should have done from the beginning, he said. I'm going to stop hiding you. The words hit her somewhere between the ribs. You can't. I'm going to tell the truth, he said. About who you are. About what you are to me. About the document. He looked at her steadily. I'm going to give Catherine Lord the actual story, which is considerably more interesting than whatever Victoria fed her, and I'm going to let the truth do what it does. She looked at him. It'll be chaos, she said. Yes, he agreed. Victoria will escalate. She will. The business implications are manageable, he said. Everything is manageable. The only thing I'm not willing to do is keep you quiet and keep you small and keep you hidden, like you are something I should be ashamed of. His voice did not waver. I am not ashamed of you, Elena. I am... He stopped, and for just a moment, the study felt like that kitchen floor, like that garden, like every honest moment they had built between them. I am the opposite of ashamed, she breathed. You're about to blow up your own life, she said. My life, he said, has been needing to be blown up for some time. She looked at him. This impossible, infuriating, careful, brave, wrong, real man. She thought about the floor she had sat on. She thought about what she had decided when she stood back up. She said, "Then do it right." He looked at her. "What?" he said. "If you're going to tell the truth," she said, "tell all of it. Not the version that protects you, not the version that makes you look better than you were. Tell Catherine Lord what actually happened. The document, the trick, all of it." He was quiet. "That makes me look like a man who made a mistake," she said. "Which is what you are, which is human, which is," she stopped, "which is what I actually want to defend. Not the version of you that's been managing everything. The one who sat on the kitchen floor level and told me he was afraid." He stared at her. "I didn't sit on the kitchen floor," he said. "Metaphorically," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in his face, slowly, completely. Like a window finally opened in a room that had been closed for a very long time. "All right," he said quietly. "All right," she said. She turned to go. "Elena," he said. She stopped. "I'm sorry," he said. "For the document. For how I did it. For the 6 weeks." She stood with her hand on the door. "I know you are," she said. "Is that enough?" he said. Quietly. Genuinely. She looked back at him. "Ask me again in a week," she said. He nodded. She left. She went back to the kitchen. She was in there for 10 minutes before Maria walked in, took one look at her and said, "Elena Marquez, you are the most complicated, simple person I have ever met in my life." Elena let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "I need coffee," she said. "You need more than coffee," Maria said, but she put the kettle on anyway. The morning moved forward. The house moved forward. And somewhere in the study, Adrian Valenti was on the phone with a journalist giving her a story. Not the one Victoria had written for her. The true one. And the true one, Elena would come to understand in the days that followed, was the one that changed everything. Because a story about a woman who had manipulated a powerful man for gain was a scandal. But a story about a powerful man who had secretly married the woman he trusted most in the only way he knew how to hold on to something real, and was now choosing her publicly over everything else. That was not a scandal at all. That was something else entirely. Something that people who had loved quietly and been overlooked and waited for someone to choose them fully and without apology. Something that those people would recognize. Something they would feel. Something they would not forget. The phone in Elena's pocket buzzed twice that afternoon. She looked at the screen. Unknown number again. She didn't answer, but she smiled just slightly and kept walking. She had work to do. She had always had work to do. The difference was that now, for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't doing it alone, and neither was he. The story ran on a Thursday. Elena found out the way most people found out about things in that house, not from Adrian directly, but from the particular quality of silence that descended when something significant had already happened, and everyone was waiting to see what happened next. Maria came in at 7:40 with her phone in her hand and set it on the counter in front of Elena without a word. Elena looked at the screen. The headline read, "Valenti Secret Marriage, the Woman He Chose Over Everything." She picked up the phone. She read the article standing at the kitchen counter with her coffee going cold beside her. Catherine Lord had written it exactly as it happened. Not the sanitized version, not the version that protected anyone. The real one, the proxy document, the benefits envelope the 6 weeks Elena hadn't known. Adrian's quote was in the 3rd paragraph, and it was the most unguarded thing she had ever seen attributed to him in print. "I handled it wrong. I made a decision for her that she had the right to make for herself. I'm not going to dress that up. What I will say is that Elena Marquez is the most honest person I have encountered in 15 years of a life that has not had much room for honesty. Everything else is details." Elena read that sentence 3 times. Then she set the phone down. Maria was watching her. "Say something," Maria said. "He used my full name," Elena said. Elena. "In a major publication," she said. "He used my full name." Is that what you're focused on right now? Maria said. Elena looked at her. I don't know what I'm focused on right now. Give me a minute. She picked up her coffee. She drank it cold. She said, Is he upstairs? He left at 6, Maria said. He had meetings. Did he say anything before he left? Maria hesitated. He asked me to make sure you ate breakfast, she said. Elena stared at her. He asked you to... She stopped. She pressed her lips together. That man, she said, is going to be the end of me. The beginning, maybe, Maria said quietly. Elena looked at her. Maria just picked up the phone and walked out. The call started at 8:15. Elena's personal cell. A number that was not public, that she had given to perhaps 12 people in the world, began ringing with numbers she didn't recognize. She declined the first 4. On the 5th, she answered because it was a local area code, and she thought it might be someone she knew. It was not someone she knew. It was a producer from a morning television program. She hung up. She turned her phone face down on the counter and did not pick it up again until noon. By noon, the story had been picked up by 4 other outlets. By 2 in the afternoon, Victoria Laurent had issued a public statement through her family's PR firm. Elena read it on Maria's tablet in the staff room. The statement was 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph expressed Victoria's deep disappointment in Adrian's choices. The second paragraph stated in language so carefully legal. It barely said anything at all, that the engagement had been entered into in good faith, and that Victoria intended to pursue all appropriate remedies available to her. The third paragraph, the one that made Elena's stomach drop, said this: Questions also remain about the legitimacy of the alleged prior marriage, as the circumstances under which Ms. Marquez's consent was obtained raise serious concerns about coercion manipulation and the exploitation of a power imbalance inherent in the employer-employee relationship. Elena read it twice. She's not attacking you, Maria said from across the table. She's attacking the marriage. I know what she's doing, Elena said. If she can get a court to look at the consent question. I know, Elena said. She stood up. She called Adrian. He picked up on the second ring. I saw it, he said before she could speak. She's going to try to have it annulled, Elena said. She's going to try, he said. She won't succeed. Adrian, the consent argument is actually valid, he said, and his voice was completely level, which somehow made it worse. What I did was legally defensible, but ethically problematic, and any court that looks at it will see that. Which is why my attorney has already drafted a secondary filing. What secondary filing? A beat. A renewal, he said. A formal public fully witnessed ceremony of consent, with your explicit signed completely informed agreement. She stood very still. You want to do it again, she said. I want to do it right, he said. This time with you actually knowing it's happening. And if I say no, she said. The line was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then I respect that, he said. And I find another way to protect you legally. But Elena, his voice shifted just slightly. I'm not asking you because of the legal situation. I'm asking because I should have asked the first time. I should have sat across from you and said what I needed to say and let you decide. He stopped. I'm asking now. She sat back down. She pressed her free hand flat on the table. She thought about everything she had thought about on the kitchen floor, and everything she had decided when she stood back up. She thought about her mother, and the laundromat, and the $12 she'd stretched into groceries at 16. She thought about Daniel Ashworth and the ring that was slightly too small, and the voice that had said, nobody wants you in front of a room full of people. She thought about Thursday evenings, and cold coffee, and notes that said thank you, and a man who couldn't love something without also trying to protect it badly. She thought about herself, who she was, what she had built, what she refused to be, and also what she refused to not be, which was chosen, fully, without apology. Ask me properly, she said. A pause. In person, he said. Tonight. Tonight, she agreed. She hung up. She looked at the wall. She was still looking at it when Bernard walked in, stopped, read the room, and quietly put the kettle on without saying a word. She loved Bernard. He brought her tea, She drank it. The afternoon was controlled chaos. Two of Victoria's family associates arrived at the estate at 3 o'clock, apparently under the impression that they were owed a conversation with Adrian. Thomas turned them away at the gate with a politeness so absolute it was practically a weapon. Elena watched from the upstairs window and felt something she hadn't expected, not triumph, not relief, but a strange, clean sense of the world reorganizing itself around a new axis. The old order was ending. She didn't know exactly what was replacing it, but she knew she was part of it. At 4 o'clock, she got the first call she actually wanted to take. It was Paolo, the groundskeeper, calling from his cell. "I saw the article," he said, his voice young and uncertain, and completely genuine. "Are you okay?" She smiled for the first time all day. "I'm okay, Paolo," she said, "because Bernard and I were talking, and we just want you to know we don't care what they're saying out there. We know you. We know what you've done here. And we—" He paused like he was reading from notes he'd prepared, which made her heart twist with affection. "We just wanted to say that." "Thank you," she said. "That means more than you know. Also, Bernard made your favorite soup," he added, just in case. She laughed. Actually laughed. "Tell Bernard I'll be down in an hour," she said. She hung up. She sat in the quiet and let herself feel something she didn't always let herself feel, which was loved. By the people who saw her do her work every day. By the people she had quietly fed and covered for and shown up for without being asked. She had built something real in this house. Not with strategy, not with calculation. Just by showing up and meaning it. Adrian arrived back at 7. She heard the car. She heard the door. She heard his footsteps. She had learned his footsteps. She hadn't meant to. It had happened the way all the important things had happened between them gradually, and then all at once. She was in the small sitting room off the kitchen, the one nobody used. She had found it in her second year to be the quietest room in the house, and she came there sometimes when she needed to think. He found her. Of course he found her. He stood in the doorway. He was still in the suit from his morning meetings, but the jacket was gone, and his sleeves were rolled to the forearms, and he looked as he so often looked when no one else was watching, exhausted, in a way he would never admit. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You look terrible," she said. "I've been on the phone for 11 hours, he said. "Sit down," she said. He sat, not across from her, next to her. Close enough that she could feel the particular warmth of someone who has been carrying a hard day and is finally allowed to set it down. They sat in silence for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket, which was draped over the arm of the chair, and he pulled something out. He held it out to her, a small velvet box. She looked at it. She looked at him. "My mother's," he said quietly. "I told you once that everyone wanted something from me. My money, my name, my power." He paused. "She didn't. She wanted me to be a person worth knowing. She wore this for 40 years, and she said it was the only thing my father ever gave her that was genuinely his, not bought, not strategic, not a performance. His." He stopped. "I want you to have it. Not as a transaction, not as a legal maneuver. Because you are the first person since her who has made me feel like I might be a person worth knowing." She stared at the box. She did not take it. Not yet. "Say it," she said. He looked at her. "Elena," he said. And his voice was for the first time in all the months she had known him entirely uncalculated. No control, no management. Just the raw, plain fact of a man who had finally run out of ways to say a true thing sideways. "Will you marry me actually? Knowing it's happening. Knowing what it means. Knowing that I will make mistakes, and that I will protect you badly sometimes, and that I am not easy, and have never been easy, but that there is no version of the rest of my life that I want to live without you in it." The room was very quiet. Elena looked at him for a long time. She thought about the note that said thank you. The one that said none of this is the end. The soup. The second plate. The garden wall. The fever and the door. And the voice that said, "You're very brave for someone who just made a joke at my expense." She thought about the kitchen floor. What she'd decided there. She reached out. She took the box. She opened it. The necklace inside was simple. A small oval pendant on a thin chain worn smooth with time, the kind of thing that held 40 years of a woman's life in its surface. She thought about a woman buried on the other side of a wall who looked at her boy and saw someone worth becoming. She thought, I think I would have liked her. She looked up at Adrian. Yes, she said. He exhaled a single quiet breath like he had been holding it for a very long time. He reached out and took the necklace from the box. She turned just slightly. He fastened it around her neck. His hands were completely steady. She noticed that. She noticed everything. They sat together in the quiet room for another few minutes, not saying anything, the way people sit together when words would only be less than the silence they're already sharing. Then Elena said, We're going to have to do this publicly. I know, he said. People are going to come after both of us, she said. I know that too. Victoria isn't finished, she said. The annulment, filing the PR campaign, whatever else she has, she's not going to walk away quietly. No, he agreed. She won't. Are you ready for that? She said. He turned and looked at her directly. I have spent 15 years being ready for everything alone, he said. I am considerably more ready for something with you beside me. She nodded once. Then we start tomorrow, she said. Tonight, he said. She looked at him. He was already picking up his phone. Marcus, he said when it answered. I need a statement ready for the morning, not from PR, from me directly, and I want Elena's name in the first sentence. He paused. No, not as a qualifier, as a fact. He hung up. He looked at her. She was already looking at him, and neither of them needed to say what was in the room between them, because it had been in the room between them for a very long time, and it was not going anywhere. It was, Elena thought, exactly where it belonged, which was at the end of it all, the only place she had ever wanted to be. Not beneath anyone, not above anyone. Just here, fully, completely, irreversibly here. She reached up and touched the necklace at her throat. 40 years of a woman's life, and now she thought the beginning of hers. Marcus had the statement ready by 10 that night. Adrian read it once, handed it back, and said, Take out the third paragraph. Marcus looked at him. The third paragraph is the one that addresses the consent question directly. I know what it addresses, Adrian said. Take it out, replace it with this. He wrote 4 sentences on the notepad on his desk and slid it across. Exactly that, nothing more. Marcus read it. He looked up. This is considerably more vulnerable than our usual communication strategy, he said carefully. That's correct, Adrian said. Send it. Marcus sent it. Elena was in the kitchen when her phone lit up with the notification, not a call this time, just a news alert that someone in her contacts had forwarded. She opened it and read Adrian's statement, standing at the counter in the dark, because she hadn't bothered to turn the lights on, which told her something about the state she was in. The statement was short. 4 paragraphs, and the last one, the 4 sentences Adrian had written by hand on a notepad, read like nothing she had ever seen from him in print before. Elena Marquez has worked in this house for 3 years. She has never asked me for anything. She has never used her position for personal gain. She is my wife, and I am proud of that fact, and I will not be explaining or apologizing for it further. She read it 3 times. Then she put her phone face down on the counter and stood there in the dark kitchen and said out loud to no one, You impossible man. She said it with something that was not quite exasperation and not quite tenderness, but lived exactly in the space between the two, which was, she was beginning to understand where most of the true things in her life had taken up residence. She went to bed. She slept better than she had in weeks. The morning came fast and loud. By 6 a.m., Adrian's statement had 17,000 shares. By 7, it had been picked up by every major outlet that had run the original story. By 8, the comment sections, which Elena read once briefly against her better judgment, were filled with people who had opinions about her, about Adrian, about class and power, and what love looked like when it crossed every line that was supposed to matter. Some of those opinions were ugly, but more of them, far more than she had expected, were something else. Women her mother's age writings about recognition. Men who had been overlooked writing about what it felt like to be chosen. People who had spent their lives in service industries writing about the specific dignity of being told publicly and without condition that they mattered. She closed the comment sections after 4 minutes. She didn't need them, but she felt them. She was thinking about all of it when Victoria Laurent walked into the kitchen at 8:45, not the front door, not through Thomas or the formal entry, through the side entrance that only staff used, which meant Victoria had been watching long enough to know how this house worked, which meant she had planned this. Elena turned from the counter. Victoria looked different from the woman who had stood in this house 2 days ago. The performance had dropped, not completely, never completely with Victoria, but enough to show the edges of something genuine underneath. She was still impeccably dressed. But there were shadows under her eyes and a tightness around her jaw that told Elena she had spent the night doing exactly what Elena suspected. Making calls, making plans, making a decision. "You knew I'd come," Victoria said. "I thought you might," Elena said. Victoria pulled out a stool and sat at the counter, unhesitating proprietary, like she was daring Elena to object, and placed a large envelope on the surface between them. "This is the annulment filing," she said. "My attorney submitted it this morning. I want you to see it before your attorney does. I want you to know exactly what's in it before Adrian spins it for you." Elena looked at the envelope. She didn't touch it. "Why?" she said. "Because I'm giving you a chance," Victoria said. "A real one, the last one." "You've given me several last chances," Elena said. "This one is different." Victoria's voice dropped the pleasantness entirely. What was left underneath was something almost honest. "Elena, I'm not a stupid woman. You're not a stupid woman. So let's stop doing this like we don't both understand exactly how it works." "Tell me how it works," Elena said. "He is using you," Victoria said. "Not the way you think, not cruelly, not deliberately. But he's using you. You represent something to him. Some idea of simplicity, of purity, of a life that's less complicated than the one he actually lives." She leaned forward slightly. "And right now, in this moment, he believes it completely. I have no doubt about that. But Adrian Valenti's world will eat you alive, Elena. His business, his enemies, his family's history. The things that are attached to his name that you don't know about yet." She paused. "I have known men like him my entire life. They fall in love with the woman who makes them feel human. And then the world reminds them of what they actually are. And the woman who made them feel human ends up paying for it." The kitchen was very quiet. Elena looked at her. "Is that what happened to you?" she said. Victoria blinked. It was a small thing. Almost nothing. But it was the first genuinely unguarded response Elena had ever gotten from this woman. "This isn't about me," Victoria said. "It sounds a little like it's about you," Elena said quietly. "I'm trying to help you. You're trying to win," Elena said. "And I think you've been trying to win for so long that it looks like helping from the inside." She met Victoria's eyes directly. "I hear what you're saying. I actually do. And maybe some of it is true. Maybe his world is harder than I understand. Maybe there are things coming that I'm not ready for." She paused. "But I've been underestimated my whole life by people who thought they were telling me how it works. By my ex-fiancé. By every person who ever looked at me and saw the uniform instead of the person wearing it." She pushed the envelope back toward Victoria. "I'll deal with the annulment through our attorneys. That's how it should go." Victoria stared at the envelope. Then she looked up. "He'll hurt you," she said. Not as a threat, as a prediction, as something she actually believed. "Not because he wants to, but because that's what they do." Elena held her gaze. "Then that'll be between him and me," she said. "That's how it works when you actually choose someone." A long silence. Victoria picked up the envelope. She stood. She was almost to the door when she stopped, not turning around, and said very quietly, almost to herself, "For what it's worth. He never looked at me the way he looks at you. Not once. Not even in the beginning." She left. Elena stood in this kitchen alone. She breathed. Then she picked up her phone and called Adrian. He picked up in one ring. "I know," he said. Thomas saw her come in. "She filed the annulment," Elena said. "I know, Marcus has it." "She said things," Elena said. "Some of them were not entirely wrong." A pause. "Tell me." "Not on the phone," she said. "Tonight. I'll tell you tonight." "Are you all right?" She stopped. Chose accuracy over easy. "I'm okay. I'm thinking. About whether I'm ready for everything attached to your name that I don't know about yet," she said. The line was quiet for 3 seconds. "That's a fair thing to think about," he said. "I know. Do you want me to tell you?" he said. "Everything. Whatever you want to know." She considered it. "Yes," she said. "But tonight, face to face." "Tonight," he said. She hung up. She went to work. This was still always what she did. She went to work. She managed the house. She handled the morning. She dealt with the caterer who called about an outstanding invoice and the dry cleaning that needed to be rerouted, and the 3 journalists who somehow got the mansion's landline number and were declined by Thomas with the same absolute politeness he had used on Victoria's associates. She worked through it all, and she thought while she worked, which was when she did her best thinking. She thought about what Victoria had said. She thought about what it meant to choose someone fully, to take the whole of a person, the architecture of their history, the weight of their worst choices and their best ones, the things that were beautiful about them, and the things that would require enormous patience and honesty, and sometimes a willingness to sit on kitchen floors and decide. She thought about her mother again. Her mother always seemed to come to her when things were hard. Her mother had loved her father for 4 years before he left. And after he left, she had not spoken bitterly about him, not to Elena, not where Elena could hear. She had said once years later when Elena was old enough to ask, "I chose him knowing what he was. The choosing was mine, the leaving was his. I don't mix those 2 things up." Elena thought about that. The choosing was hers. She was choosing, not because she was rescued, not because someone had finally seen her value and bestowed it upon her like a gift. She had always known her value. That was never the question. The question was whether she was going to let herself have what she wanted without apologizing for wanting it. The answer she decided for the final time, cleaning the hallway of the 2nd floor at 11 in the morning with the necklace at her throat, and the city buzzing outside, and the whole complicated, real, imperfect future waiting on the other side of tonight. The answer was yes. The twist came at 2 in the afternoon. It didn't come from Victoria. It came from a man Elena had never met, which was somehow worse. His name was Richard Valenti, Adrian's uncle. He called the mansion's main line, and when Thomas answered, Richard Valenti said he wanted to speak with the woman the press was calling Adrian's wife, and Thomas, bless him, said he would check if she was available, and came to Elena with an expression on his face that was professional and deeply uncertain. "You don't have to take it," Thomas said. "Is he?" she started. "I've worked here longer than you," Thomas said. "Long enough to know that Richard Valenti is the one person in Adrian's world that Adrian has never fully managed. They haven't spoken in 2 years." Elena processed this. "I'll take it," she said. She went to the small sitting room, the quiet one. She picked up the extension. "This is Elena," she said. The voice on the other end was older than she expected. Gravel-edged, unhurried. The voice a man who had learned that he didn't need to rush because things came to him eventually anyway. "Elena," he said, "I've been reading about you all morning." "I imagine a lot of people have," she said. Heimat, a sound that might have been a laugh. Direct. Good. Adrian always did have terrible taste in the mealy-mouthed. He paused. "I'm going to say something to you, and I want you to hear it without jumping to conclusions." "Go ahead," she said. "I want to meet you," he said. "Before this goes any further. Before the annulment, before the public ceremony, before whatever Adrian has planned next. I want to sit across a table from you and look you in the eye." Elena was careful. "Why?" "Because the Valenti name is not just Adrian's," he said. "And because the last time a woman came into this family with the kind of speed and drama that you have, it did not end well, For anyone. I've been in this house for 3 years, she said. That's not what I meant, he said. I meant the marriage, the publicity, the way this has all accelerated. He paused. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm telling you that I have seen what happens to people who get caught in Adrian's orbit when things move this fast. And I am asking as a courtesy that you meet with me before you let it move any faster. She sat with that for a moment. Does Adrian know you're calling? She said. No. Is that strategic? A pause. Longer this time. That's a good question, he said. You're more perceptive than I expected. You expected less because of what I do for a living, she said. Possibly, he said. I'm trying not to. She believed him, which surprised her. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking, he said. My number will appear on your call log. Use it when you've thought. He hung up. She sat in the quiet room for 5 full minutes. Then she did something that would surprise people who thought they had figured her out. She called Adrian, immediately, without sitting on this information, without deciding how to handle it alone first. He picked up. Your uncle called, she said. The silence on the other end was very specific, the kind of silence that has shape and weight. Richard, Adrian said finally. He wants to meet me, before things go further. He said you two haven't spoken in 2 years. We haven't, Adrian said. Why? Another silence, different quality. Because 2 years ago, Adrian said carefully. Richard told me that the direction I was taking the business, the parts of it that weren't clean. Elena, the parts I've never talked to you about, he told me those parts were going to come back. That I couldn't keep separating the person I was trying to be from the operation I was running, and I told him he was wrong. A pause. He was not wrong. She absorbed this. What parts? She said. He was quiet. Tonight, he said. I told you tonight. Face to face. Adrian. I'm not hiding from you, he said. I just need to say it to your face. Some things deserve to be said to someone's face. She understood that. Did you and Richard leave things badly? She said. I said things I shouldn't have said, he said. He said things that were true. Conversations like that tend to end badly. Do you want to see him? She said. The longest pause yet. Yes, he said. I think I do, but... He stopped. But you're afraid of what happens if you let him back in and then have to admit he was right, she said. A beat. You do that, he said quietly. You say the thing I'm working toward in half the time it takes me to get there. I've been doing it for 3 years, she said. You've just been listening now. He was quiet for a moment. Call him back, he said. Tell him dinner. Here, tomorrow night. You're sure? No, he said, but do it anyway. She called Richard Valenti back. She told him dinner the Valenti estate 7 o'clock tomorrow. He said, good. She said, one condition. He said, name it. She said, you talk to him, not at him. Whatever you have to say, you say it like you're trying to solve a problem, not win an argument. Because I've spent 3 years watching this man carry things alone that he shouldn't have had to carry alone, and I am not going to sit at a table and watch someone who loves him add to the weight. A long pause. When Richard Valenti spoke again, his voice was different, quieter. Adrian didn't choose wrong, he said. No, she said. He didn't. She hung up. She went back to work. At 4 o'clock, Marcus called her directly. Not Adrian's line, her personal cell, and said in his carefully neutral voice that the annulment filing had hit a procedural issue. Victoria's attorneys had submitted to the wrong jurisdiction, apparently a clerical error that would delay the process by several weeks minimum. He did not editorialize. He did not say whether this was luck or something else. Elena did not ask. Thank you, Marcus, she said. Of course, he said. She thought about asking. She thought about the specific methods that Adrian Valenti had at his disposal. The ways a man of his resources and connections could cause procedural delays to appear in legal filings submitted by opposing counsel. She thought about the proxy marriage document. She thought about what she had decided on the kitchen floor. She thought about the difference between knowing everything and needing to know everything. She filed the information away, and she kept walking. That was growth, she thought. That was the specific, uncomfortable, necessary growth of loving a person who was not simple. Recognizing the things you were choosing not to see. Being honest with yourself about the choosing and deciding that the whole of the person was worth the complexity of the parts. Tonight came. Adrian came home at 6:30. He walked into the kitchen. Their kitchen, she had started thinking of it that way, which said something, and he sat at the counter and he looked at her and he said, "Sit down." She sat across from him, and he talked. He talked for an hour and 15 minutes. He told her about the parts of his business that were not clean. Not catastrophically criminal, not the kind of thing that ended in federal indictments, but not clean. Money that moved through channels that preferred not to be examined too closely. Relationships with people whose methods he had benefited from without directly participating in. Decisions he had made in the years when he was building the empire that he would not make the same way now, and that he had been for 2 years very quietly and very carefully unwinding. Richard had told him to unwind them. He had started after Richard left. He had never told Richard that. Elena listened to all of it. She did not interrupt. She did not perform shock or judgment or reassurance. She listened the way she listened to everything. The way she had learned to listen in a life where paying attention was the skill that kept you safe, and she let him finish. When he was done, the room was quiet. She said, "Why are you unwinding it?" He looked at her. "Because it's wrong." "You knew it was wrong before Richard said so," she said. "Yes." "So why then? Why is it taking this long?" He was quiet. "Because knowing something is wrong and being able to stop it are not the same thing," he said. "The architecture of it, the relationships, the obligations, the people who depend on those channels continuing to exist. You can't just turn a switch. You have to build something else first. Something that holds the same weight by different means." She looked at him. "And have you," she said, "built the something else?" He met her eyes. "I'm close," he said. "How close?" 18 months, maybe less." She nodded slowly. "Richard needs to know that," she said. "I know. Tomorrow night," she said. "You tell him what you told me, all of it, the same way." He was quiet for a moment. "It'll mean admitting I should have listened 2 years ago," he said. "Yes," she said. "It will." "That's not," he started. "Easy," she said. "I know. Do it anyway." He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved. "You're going to say that to me a lot, aren't you?" he said. "Do it anyway." "Probably," she said. "Do you mind?" He looked at her for a long moment. This man who had built walls so high and so thick that the world had simply accepted them as architecture, and he said very quietly, "No, I don't mind at all." She reached across the counter. She put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers. They sat like that in the kitchen while the house settled around them. Bernard's footsteps in the hall. Paulo's voice outside Maria, locking the side door. The ordinary sounds of a life that had been built one small act of showing up after another. She thought about the first note. "Thank you." She thought about the second. "None of this is the end." She thought about the necklace at her throat. She thought about tomorrow night, and the conversation that needed to happen, and the 18 months that needed to finish, and the public ceremony that still needed to be planned, and Victoria's annulment filing, and whatever Harlow was or wasn't doing, and the uncle who had told a hard truth 2 years too early and deserved to hear that he had been right. She thought about all of it, and she thought this is what choosing actually looks like. Not the moment of the yes, not the romantic sentence, but the hour and 15-minute conversation in the kitchen afterward, and the hand on the counter, and the list of true and complicated things that don't get simpler but become somehow more possible when you are not carrying them alone. She was not carrying anything alone anymore. Neither was he. That was, she thought, the whole of it. That was everything. She tightened her hand around his. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Outside, the city moved and breathed and continued indifferent and enormous exactly as it always had. Inside, two people sat in a kitchen. And for the first time in a very long time, the silence in the Valenti house felt like something it had never quite felt before. It felt like home. Richard Valenti arrived at 7 o'clock exactly. Elena heard the car. She heard Thomas open the gate. She heard the footsteps in the foyer heavier than Adrian's, slower the walk of a man who had stopped needing to prove anything through speed a long time ago. She was in the kitchen when Adrian came to find her. He stood in the doorway. His jacket was on his collar straight, and he looked like he always looked when he was managing something difficult, controlled on the surface with something underneath that was working very hard. She looked at him. "You're nervous," she said. "I don't get nervous," he said. "You're nervous," she said again. He exhaled through his nose. "He's going to say he was right." "He was right," she said. "I know that." "Then it shouldn't be hard to hear it." He looked at her for a moment. "You've never had to sit across from someone who told you so and admit it out loud." She raised an eyebrow. "Adrian, I have done that exact thing more times than I can count. The first time is the hardest. After that, it just becomes practice." Something in his face shifted, a small loosening, the kind she had learned to recognize as his version of relief. "Come in with me," he said. She blinked. "This is between you and your uncle." "Come in with me anyway," he said. "Not to manage it, not to translate, just—" He stopped. "Just be in the room." She looked at him for a moment. She picked up her coffee. "All right," she said. Richard Valenti was in the sitting room off the main hall, the formal one, not the small quiet room that was hers. He was standing when they entered, which told her something. He was a tall man, broader than Adrian, with the specific physical quality of someone who had once been very strong and still carried the memory of it in his posture. His hair was gray, and his eyes were the same dark shade as Adrian's, but warmer at the edges, or perhaps just older. He looked at Adrian first. Then he looked at Elena. He looked at her the way she had learned to recognize in people who were actually trying to see something, not assessing, not calculating, just looking. "You're smaller than I expected," he said. "People usually say that," she said. "And less afraid of me than I expected," he added. "I've met the man you're related to," she said. "The intimidation threshold is high." Richard Valnet looked at Adrian. "I like her," he said. "I know," Adrian said. "Sit down." They sat, and Adrian talked. He said everything he had said to Elena the night before, the same facts, the same timeline, the same honest accounting of what he had built, and what he had been quietly dismantling, and how long it was going to take. He said it without managing it, without the careful framing that usually buffered every significant thing he communicated. He just said it directly to the man who had told him 2 years ago that he needed to hear it. Richard listened. How was a good listener, Elena noticed. Not performing patience, actually patient. Actually still. When Adrian finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Richard said, "You started without telling me." "Yes," Adrian said. "Why?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. "Because I needed to know I could," he said. "Before I told anyone. I needed to know it wasn't just an intention, that it was actually happening." Richard looked at him. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 10 years, he said. "I know," Adrian said. Another silence. Richard looked at Elena. "You did this," he said, not accusingly, like he was noting something factual. "He did this," she said. "I just stopped letting him pretend he didn't want to." Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he said to Adrian, "Your mother would have liked her." Adrian looked at his hands. "I know," he said, very quietly. Richard leaned forward. "I'm not here to say I told you so," he said. "I want that clear. I'm here because you're family, because I walked away when I shouldn't have walked away, and I've spent 2 years being right about it while you've been here doing the work alone. And that," his voice shifted just slightly, just enough, "that was wrong of me. Being right doesn't excuse walking away." Elena watched Adrian absorb that. She watched the specific way a person receives an apology they have needed for a long time and didn't know they were still waiting for the slight change in the shoulders, the breath that goes in slightly deeper than the ones before it. "We're past it," Adrian said. "Say it properly," Elena said. Both men looked at her. She looked at Adrian. He apologized properly. Respond properly. A beat. Adrian looked back at his uncle. "I needed you to stay," he said. "When you left, I told myself it didn't matter. It mattered." Richard nodded once. It was not an elaborate moment. It was two men in a room saying true things with very few words, which Elena had come to understand was the only language in this family that carried real weight. 18 months, Richard said. "You finish it." 18 months, Adrian confirmed. "And in the meantime," Adrian said, "I'm getting married, publicly, properly, to the woman who made me start the 18 months in the first place, even though she didn't know that's what she was doing." Richard looked at Elena again. She looked back at him steadily. "You're sure," he said. To her, not to Adrian. "I've been sure for a while," she said. "I just needed him to catch up." Richard made the sound that might have been a laugh again. This time it definitely was one. Dinner was not what Elena expected. It was not formal or cautious or managed. It was loud in the way families are loud when the performance has dropped, and what's underneath is actual people talking over each other, finishing sentences, arguing about things that don't matter, and agreeing loudly about things that do. Richard had opinions about everything. About the business, about the estate, about Adrian's communication strategy, about the statement Marcus had sent to the press. 4 paragraphs, Richard said, pointing at Adrian with his fork. "You reduced your entire marriage to 4 paragraphs." "They were efficient paragraphs," Adrian said. "They were emotionally illiterate paragraphs dressed up as confident ones," Richard said. He looked at Elena. "Was that your idea or his?" "His," she said. "I'd have written more." "Obviously," Richard said, "because you have functioning emotional range." He looked back at Adrian. "Marry her faster. That's the plan," Adrian said. Elena drank her wine and looked at the two of them and thought, this is what it was supposed to look like. This is what this house was supposed to sound like. Not the enforced silence and the managed distance and the loneliness that had been mistaken for dignity. This. Loud and honest and slightly too much and completely real. She thought about all the Thursday evenings Adrian had stood alone in the garden. She thought never again. The twist arrived with dessert. Marcus called Adrian's cell at 9:15. Adrian excused him. 2 minutes, he said. And the way he said it told Elena it was not 2 minutes, and she sat with Richard and listened to Richard talk about Adrian as a boy, which was something she had not expected, and which unlocked something in her chest that she hadn't known was locked. Richard talked about a kid who was too serious too young. A kid who took on weight before he had the shoulders for it. A kid who loved his mother completely and lost her too early and rebuilt himself afterward in the only image available to him. The image of the hard men who surrounded him, who equated strength with silence and distance with safety. He didn't choose to be who he became, Richard said. He built it from what he had. That's different. I know, Elena said. But you can see both, Richard said. The built thing and what it was built over. Yes, she said. That's rare, he said. Don't stop. Adrian came back. He sat down. He looked at Elena with an expression she had learned to read, the one that meant something had happened, that he was sorting into the correct category before he spoke. Victoria dropped the annulment, he said. Silence. Even Richard looked up. Voluntarily, Elena said. Her attorney filed a withdrawal 20 minutes ago, Adrian said. No statement, no conditions, just a withdrawal. Elena processed this. Why? She said. Adrian was quiet for a moment. I don't know yet, he said. Richard set down his fork. You should find out. I will, Adrian said. Tonight, Richard said. In the morning, Adrian said. Tonight I'm having dinner with my family. The word landed on the table between all three of them. Family. Richard picked up his fork. Elena picked up her wine. Adrian reached under the table and put his hand over hers briefly, just for a moment, and then he reached for his own glass. None of them made a thing of it. They finished dinner. The reason for Victoria's withdrawal came at 11 o'clock the following morning. It came not from Victoria's attorney, or from Marcus, or from any of the careful, precise channels through which significant information usually flowed in Adrian's world. It came from Bernard, who had a cousin who worked at a hotel downtown, and whose cousin had mentioned in the particular offhand way of someone mentioning something they don't quite understand. The significance of that. A woman matching Victoria Laurent's description had checked into the hotel 3 days ago, accompanied by a man who was not Adrian Valenti, and who had signed the room under a name that was not Laurent, Bernard told Maria. Maria came to Elena. Elena sat with it for 45 minutes. Then she went to find Adrian. He was in the study. She sat across from him. She told him what Bernard had told Maria. He listened. When she finished, he was very still. "Say what you're thinking," she said. "I'm thinking," he said slowly, "that Victoria knew this was findable. She's too careful to have made a visible mistake unless she intended it to be found." Elena looked at him. "You think she let herself be found?" "I think," he said, "that Victoria Laurent decided at some point in the last 48 hours that the cost of this fight was higher than the prize. And I think she found a way to exit that let her keep something, her dignity, or her leverage, or whatever is most important to her right now." He paused. "And I think she made sure that we found out about the hotel because it gives her a reason, a face-saving reason, an exit that doesn't look like defeat." Elena absorbed this. "She could have just withdrawn," she said, "without giving us the reason." "Yes," he said. "But then it looks like she lost. This way," he considered, "this way it looks like she chose something else." Elena thought about the woman who had stood in the hallway and said, "He never looked at me the way he looks at you." She thought about the exhaustion she had seen behind the performance. She thought about a woman who had spent so long pursuing the architecture of a life, the name, the power, the position that she had, somewhere quietly started living a different one in a hotel room downtown. "I'm not going to pursue it," she said. Adrian looked at her. "She came after you," he said. "She did," Elena said. "And now she's gone. And I'm not going to spend what comes next chasing someone who has already left the field." She met his eyes. She was trying to win something. She didn't win it. That's enough. He held her gaze. "You're more generous than I am," he said. "I know," she said. "It balances out." He looked at her for a moment. Then very quietly he said, "What do you want for the ceremony? For the public one? What do you actually want it to look like?" She blinked. It was such an ordinary question after so much that had been anything but ordinary that it caught her completely off guard. "What do I want?" she said. "Yes." She thought about it. She thought about what she had always told herself. She didn't need the grand gestures, the elaborate settings, the version of love that required an audience to be real. But she also thought about standing in that ballroom while Victoria humiliated her in front of a room full of people. She thought about Daniel Ashworth saying, "Nobody wants you," in a voice that was meant to be the final word. She thought about every person who had ever walked past her like she wasn't there. She thought about what it meant to have something witnessed. "I want it to be real," she said. "I want the people who work in this house to be there. Maria and Bernard and Paolo and Thomas. I want Richard there. I want—" She stopped. "I want to say yes, knowing that the people who saw me when no one else did are watching." He nodded. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks, she said. "In the garden," he said. She thought about the wall, the grave on the other side, the Thursday evenings. "Yes," she said. "In the garden." He picked up his phone. He called Marcus. "Garden ceremony," he said. 2 weeks. Staff and family only, no press. Organize it." He paused. "Yes, all of it." He hung up. He looked at her. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks, she said. She stood up to go. "Elena," he said. She turned. He was looking at her with the expression she had come to love most, the one with no calculation in it, the one that was simply him, simply the person underneath everything he had built to protect himself. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, the same 2 words as the beginning. She looked at him. "You're welcome," she said. She meant everything by it. The 2 weeks moved fast. That was the thing about real life. It moved fast when you stopped watching it from a careful distance and started actually living in it. Elena moved through those 2 weeks the way she moved through everything, steadily paying attention, solving the problems in front of her. She had a conversation with her mother that lasted 2 hours and ended with her mother crying on the phone and saying in Spanish and English both that she had always known her daughter was going to surprise the world. She had just not known it would happen in quite this particular way. She had a conversation with Maria that lasted 4 minutes and ended with Maria saying, "I owe you an apology for what I said in the kitchen that morning about people like us. I was wrong." Elena said, "You were scared for me." Maria said, "I was scared because you were doing the thing I was always too afraid to do." Elena said, "What thing?" Maria said, "Believing you deserved it." She thought about that for a long time. She believed she deserved it. She had always believed it, actually. That was the thing people misunderstood about her. They thought she had learned to value herself through Adrian's attention, through being chosen, through having a powerful man see her. But it had never worked that way. She had known her own worth for a long time. She had known it in the laundromat, and in Daniel Ashworth's careful cruelty, and in 3 years of cleaned rooms and cold mornings. What Adrian had given her was not knowledge of her worth. He had given her someone to share it with. That was different. That was everything. The ceremony happened on a Saturday. The garden was quiet, not decorated extravagantly. Elena had been specific about that. Simple flowers from Bernard's herb garden along the path. The afternoon light doing what afternoon light does when you stop trying to control it and just let it be. The people she had asked for were there. Maria, who stood at the edge of the small group with her arms crossed and her chin up and her eyes suspiciously bright. Bernard, who had cooked the entire reception himself and kept slipping out to check on things in the kitchen between every significant moment. Paolo, who was wearing the nicest jacket Elena had ever seen on him and looked like he was actively fighting the urge to take photographs. Thomas standing precisely where Thomas always stood, slightly apart, fully present, the most reliable person Elena had ever met. Richard next to Adrian, which was where he was supposed to be and had always been supposed to be. And on the other side of the stone wall, the quiet presence of a woman Elena had never met and thought about often, a woman who had looked at her boy and seen someone worth becoming, and who had, in ways Elena was still discovering, made this possible. Elena stood in the garden in a dress she had bought herself. Not borrowed, not loaned, hers. She looked at Adrian. He looked at her. He looked the way he had looked that first night in the sick room, human, real, stripped of every layer of management and control, just the person underneath. Except this time, he was not sick. This time, he was the most present she had ever seen him. The officiant asked the question. Adrian said yes before the sentence was finished. Elena let him finish asking her. She wanted to hear the whole question. She had earned the whole question. Then she said yes. And this time she had signed the paper herself. She had read every word. She had known exactly what she was agreeing to, and she had agreed to it fully and without apology, the way she had decided to do things from here on. Richard put his hand briefly on Adrian's shoulder when it was done. Maria made a sound that was definitively not crying. Bernard disappeared to the kitchen. Paolo did take a photograph, and Elena let him, because some things deserved to be witnessed and then kept. And Thomas, steady, precise, 15-year. Thomas looked at Elena after it was over and said very quietly, "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Valenti." She felt that in her bones. Later, much later after, Bernard's food, and Richard's 2 loud opinions, and Maria finally crying openly, and Paolo showing everyone the photograph on his phone, after the garden emptied, and the house settled, and the staff went home, and Richard hugged Adrian in the foyer in the slightly awkward way of 2 men who had missed each other for 2 years and didn't quite know how to hold that yet. After all of it, Elena and Adrian sat in the small, quiet sitting room. The one nobody used. Hers. She was wearing the necklace. She was still wearing the dress. She was exhausted in the specific, complete way of someone who has carried something heavy for a very long time and has just been allowed to set it down. Adrian sat next to her, not across. Next to. Close. Neither of them said anything for a while. Then he said, "Daniel Ashworth was at a conference in the city last week." She looked at him. "You know this because—" "I know things," he said. "Adrian." "He's fine," he said. "I didn't do anything. I just know where he is." He paused. "I wanted to. For a while. After the foyer. After what he said to you at the party." "But you didn't," she said. "But I didn't," he confirmed. "Because you wouldn't have wanted me to. And because he stopped. Because revenge is not the same as justice, and I have spent enough of my life confusing the two." She looked at him. "Who told you that?" she said. He looked back at her. "You did," he said. "Not directly, but you did." She turned and looked at the wall, the window that faced the garden, the wall beyond it, the city beyond that. She thought about a woman who had worked in this house for 3 years and been invisible to almost everyone in it. She thought about what it had cost to stay, and what it had cost to be honest, and what it had cost to stand in a hallway and say no to a woman who had everything and mean it. She thought about the note that said thank you, and the note that said none of this is the end, and the way. Both of those things had turned out to be the most accurate sentences she had ever held in her hands. "Do you regret it?" she said. "Any of it. The proxy document. The way it started." He thought about it. Genuinely. The way she had learned to respect not the quick answer, not the managed answer, but the real one. "I regret the method," he said. "I don't regret the intention, and I don't—" He paused. "I don't regret a single day that came after, including the days that were hard, including the conversations I didn't want to have, and the things I had to say out loud that I'd spent years keeping in." He looked at her. "You made me tell the truth. I didn't know how much I needed to do that until I started." She nodded. She put her head back against the seat. She was very tired. She was very glad. "We have to deal with the business in the morning," she said. "The 18 months. The pieces you're still unwinding. I want to understand all of it." "I know," he said. "And Richard is going to have opinions." "He always has opinions," he said. "Good," she said. "That's good. You need someone who has opinions." "I have you," he said. "You need more than one person," she said firmly. "That's the whole lesson, Adrian. That's everything. One person cannot be your whole world. Not me, not your uncle, not anyone. You need people. Plural. Who push back and tell you the truth and show up without being asked." He was quiet. "You sound like my mother," he said softly. She lifted her head and looked at him. "Tell me about her," she said. So he did. He talked for an hour. About a woman who had grown tomatoes in the back of an estate this size and eaten them standing over the sink, because she said good things should be eaten where they grew. About a woman who had told her son once when he was 11 and trying very hard to be frightening, "You don't have to be the scariest thing in the room to be the most powerful. You just have to be the most honest." About a woman who died too young and left a boy behind, who tried to build everything she would have wanted him to have without knowing how to do it without her. Elena listened. She listened the way she had always listened, but differently now, not as a housekeeper learning a room, not as someone cataloging information to be useful. As a wife. As a partner. As someone who was in this for the full duration, the hard parts and the beautiful parts and everything in between. When he finished, the room was quiet. She reached out and took his hand. She held it. He held hers. And then Elena Marquez, who had come to this house with nothing except her willingness to see people clearly and treat them like they mattered, who had been invisible to almost everyone and necessary to more than she knew, who had survived being small and been told she would stay that way, and had not quietly and without announcement stayed that way at all. Elena Marquez looked at the man beside her and thought, "This is real. All of it. The difficulty and the love and the work still ahead, and the people downstairs who saw her do every unglamorous thing that brought her here. This is the most real thing I have ever had." And she thought one final time about Daniel Ashworth's voice in a crowded room. "Nobody wants you." She looked at the man beside her. She felt the weight of the necklace at her throat. The 40 years of a life lived with intention passed from hand to hand until it reached hers. She looked at the window, the garden, the wall, the city beyond. She thought wrong. Somebody wanted her. Somebody had crossed a room and lowered his voice and chosen her in every way a person can be chosen imperfectly, and then better privately, and then publicly in secret, and then in front of everyone who had ever watched her and not seen her. The most dangerous man in the city had chosen the woman nobody noticed, and the woman nobody noticed had, without asking permission or apologizing for the wanting, chosen him right back. That was the whole story. That was all of it. And it was from beginning to end entirely enough.